much. And thank everyone. Thanks everyone for being here. And we're so grateful to be sharing Zoom space with you all. So Danielle, thanks for being on top of the slides. And we'll get started. So as mentioned, my name is Noopur Agarwal. I'm an assistant professor at the University of San Francisco, and I'll be co-hosting with Danielle. Danielle, can you say a quick hello so we see you in the Zoom grid?
Hi.
And she is an assistant professor at Arizona State University. Also we are hosting with Jeannie Joshi, who is director of Joshi Design, and Parsons, the New School guest lecturer and alum. Jeannie, can you give us a hello? So the three of us have really gotten, we've really had a lot of fun getting to know each other, and we've had some great conversations that we are excited to have you all join in on. So essentially, we have come to the conclusion that creating through crisis may require a shift in our thinking about time, scale, and context in relation to our work. And that is what we'll be discussing in our roundtable. But before we dive in, we wanted to tell you a little bit more about ourselves, what we're finding inspiring in this moment or in the past couple of months, and give you a look into our thought process. We'll then invite you to think about your own research practice as an individual, and then afterwards we'll ask you to share and compare in a breakout room, and then hopefully come back together and just discuss. So I'll turn it over to Danielle to give you a little bit more background on her.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad that you all could make it here today. And I want to thank AIGA, DEC, and DEI for making this possible. My name is Danielle Foushée. I teach design rhetoric, media culture, and research methods seminars, as well as graduate studios, experimental methods, public and urban arts, and whatever else I'm asked to jump into. My research and creative practices center around community engagement, grassroots interventions in public spaces, and interrogating hegemonic systems of cultural and economic power in design and the arts. I'm founder and director of Phoenix Mural Project, which is an effort to document and archive images of the city's urban art and its local street art culture through maps, oral histories, community events, tours, and augmented reality content. Jeannie?
Hi, I'm Jeannie Joshi, and thank you, Lisa and Alberto, for Lisa, right? This is amazing. Probably interacting on Slack this much. So I'm Jeannie Joshi, and I'm happy to be here with you all today too. I'm principal director at Joshi Design, which is based in New York City, Manhattan. I work in strategic design, both in physical and digital spaces, 2D, 3D. And most of my work is focused on luxury, beauty, and retail verticals, as well as social impact projects. One in particular, we presented at New School just a recent while ago. I grew up in India, Africa, and the United States. I'm educated in digital design and traditional art from Chicago and New York City, Parsons, the New School. I have a mission to make the world a more beautiful place and give products both old and new a numinous glow that will attract consumers both online and in store. I've taught and researched design literacy in the United States and Africa, and from the earliest of my childhood, I've been fascinated by the world as a place of many cultures, and I believe both beauty and ethnologic awareness should inform marketplace design in the digital age. So once again, I'm happy to be here and join in this discussion today. Thank you.
And as mentioned, I'm Newper. I'm faculty at the University of San Francisco, where I teach foundational courses in visual communication, digital media, and branding and packaging. I'm more broadly interested in digital culture, explorations in identity and privilege through design, and supporting cultural organizations and their public programming. Recently, I completed an environmental graphics project, a public exhibition entitled Coal and Ice, which was a documentary photography show that used large-scale projections to amplify conversations about climate change. Currently, I'm a designer at the Headland Center for the Arts, and I'm also a design consultant for the Creative Arts Center in LA, which preserves and promotes Karita Kent's art, teaching, and passion for social justice. I've particularly found it really interesting at this moment and informative to see how cultural centers are trying to shift their work, and I think we can learn from them. So I'm, again, really grateful to be here with you all and learn from you all. So thanks.
So this slide here was literally, I'd say, how we started to kind of collaborate and start thinking about our process and including what we wanted to talk about. And we started thinking about a lot of the conference theme shift. And obviously in relation to our current events in this unprecedented, the word unprecedented and pivot nature of 2020. We debated about how to define research, which is, you know, as we can see, it's now a moving target, especially for design educators, but practitioners also, since everyone's world has shifted. We let our minds wander, and we explored and went down all types of different, you know, territories and slight abysses. And then in the end, we were curious to uncover like what the impact, and the impact is in bold and in all caps, is the impact of our research, writing, and creative practices in the present moment. And we asked ourselves, I'm going to pass it off to Danielle.
Oh, sorry, I'm going crazy. So we asked ourselves what needs to shift in order to create the world we want to see, and how can our efforts lead to change? And so we agreed that as educators and researchers, we have to continue our efforts to create new knowledge, right? And then use that knowledge to imagine and design new cultural conditions that can support happier, healthier communities and a more equitable and democratic society. We wondered, how do we accomplish these objectives both as individual practitioners and across the profession collectively? As designers tend to do, we ended up creating this diagram to help us think about what that might look like. The hourglass seems like a good metaphor right now. We imagine the current crisis before and after mediation through our research and creative practices. We were also curious to see how people are already responding to the events of 2020, not just designers, but people, you know, grassroots efforts, things happening in the community. What can we learn from them? How can grassroots efforts inform and inspire our design work moving forward? We were especially inspired by creative expressions of hope, resilience, and leadership bubbling up from within these communities. These are powerful public interventions, not bound by any conventional rules of design aesthetics. Instead, they're direct and spontaneous responses to the physical and emotional needs of people in the moment.
And so we're just going to talk about some inspiration that we've pulled from our recent times. And so I'm sure all of you are kind of familiar with these collective performances. We've not only been witnessing them, but we've been actively partaking in them, which is an amazing phenomenon. Here in San Francisco, inspired by other performances that were happening across the world, we rallied to clap every evening at 7 p.m. for the essential workers at the time they were changing shifts. In San Francisco, the city even closed off several streets to cars, making way for pedestrians. And as a result, in my neighborhood, I was introduced to a cellist named Saul Richmond Rakerd, who holds weekly concerts on his stoop for those passing by. And I think that the impact of these performances are so special, and they've moved me to tears because they're bringing us together when we can't be. And I am reminded of call and response methods in music, where we're actually listening to one another and actually answering. And at a community level, we've stopped to perform acts of gratitude from one another. And it's not just when you're in your yoga class that you paid for that you take a minute to show gratitude. It's amazing that we're all doing this kind of collectively. So that's one piece of inspiration that we've taken from these times.
Also, we are There's tons of visual messages being put out into the world. We love all these visual things that are popping up everywhere. They're especially poignant now in response to the epidemic of not only COVID, but authorities murdering Black folks with impunity. George Floyd murals and Black Lives Matter street paintings are being created as symbols of support for change in communities around the globe. In Phoenix, Arizona, where I live, local artists are uniting the city with a campaign called Love Fights Back, with graffiti-inspired murals, music, swag, and live b-boy videos on social media. Larger than life public statements like these are also useful ways to get the media to pay attention to the community as well. In spite of our social distancing and being apart, we can use social media, we can use traditional media to push our messages of hope and resilience out to one another. And since these messages are usually initiated and implemented by the people who are affected, they're mostly free of the patronizing tone that we've seen from many businesses, nonprofits, and even universities. I don't know if anybody else just kind of felt gross when you saw all the corporations with their, we believe Black Lives Matter. Really? I don't know, just felt kind of gross. But these expressions, these visual expressions are more authentic and more community driven.
And on that too, here in New York City, the Black Lives movement was global. But in New York, I don't know if this happened elsewhere, we had a very specific movement. It was a community-led free food refrigerators. I don't know if you've read about it, but it was a New York Times piece that just was recently published by photojournalist Stephanie Keith, if you want to look that up. But basically, they were nicknamed as friendly fridges, and they started popping up around the city sidewalks as early as February, I think, of this year, and in response to the COVID quarantine and the lockdown. And as I think a lot of people do know, this is not a most equitable city here, so a lot of New Yorkers they didn't have access. There was food insecurity, so healthy meals were very hard to find during the lockdown. And these activists began stocking the fridges for those in need, and anyone was welcome to take whatever they wanted. They could leave behind the food that they don't need. Volunteers also organized to clean and stock the refrigerators daily, and they asked local restaurants and stores to donate unused or unsold food items instead of throwing them away. So this was quite powerful, and I thought I think it might be unique to New York City. We come together as a community quite often, so this was, another fantastic example of something going viral during this time and looking at our resources, just like what you have to work with.
So what we noticed in all these examples of kind of community-driven design projects that are occurring in public places, we noticed that there's a strong shift in overall cultural values that's happening right now, especially with regard to, like we said, community engagement, civic participation, and resilience in the face of the unknown. We're also noticing communities recommitting to fundamental American ideals of justice, equality, and fairness. And combined with climate change concerns, the tanking economy, and a general newfound appreciation for our own homes, people have begun to change their consumer behaviors towards more DIY, domestic, and thrifty lifestyles. So as design researchers, what we want to know is, how might we use our cultural capital to amplify these values in our work and with our students? What kind of world are our communities asking for? What kind of world are we ourselves dreaming of? And perhaps most importantly, how might we work together to design new social contexts in which these visions are most likely to thrive?
we don't have all the answers to these really big questions, and I don't like clear-cut answers anyway. But if we look collectively, and we think about our research endeavors, maybe we could begin to unpack these bigger questions. So now we're returning back to our original proposal, which was, we believe that in order to create through crisis, we have to rethink time, scale, and context in relation to our work. So what does that mean? Let me unpack that just a little bit more. More specifically, when you think about time in relation to your research, your initial thoughts, what are they? They might be something like this. What is time now anyway? How do we even manage our time for research? Can I plan for all of my research endeavors to be short term? Because who even knows what next month will look like? When you think of scale in relation to your research projects, you might think, can I shift my projects to be hyperlocal? Because I can't really leave my house. Can I share more work globally now that it is digital, now that I'm sharing everything digital anyway? How do I make work that's more collective or more accessible? And when you think of context in relation to your research, you may think about things like, what was my project? What is it now? And what can it be? You may think about how we can create new contexts of value and appreciation. And I know this has been discussed throughout the conference, and also in the Slack channels of, you know, we're sharing work in new ways that may not be originally valued on, let's say, a promotion and tenure application. But can we change what value means now in those ways? And other things might come up about context, like, have I considered sustainability in this work? So we want to know what comes to mind when you put your research through these lenses. So if everyone's okay with it, I actually want to take 2 minutes for us to reflect on our own before we go into breakout groups. So can you grab a piece of paper and something to write with, or open up a note-taking app on your current device? And I'll give you a minute to get that going.
And I wanted to add, you know, when we were working together as a group, coming up with not only the hourglass diagram, we were looking at our own values and the challenges and some of the thought starters that I felt like sharing for, like, you know, to even help in the breakout session time challenge. That would require us to rethink and redesign, like, what the new normal, I don't really, it's a buzzword, but there is this sort of, you know, there is this embrace the unknown. So what is this new time into our practice? As a professional, there was, you know, the idea of speed to market, which is completely, you know, not only was it over the top, it was just wrong in all ways. And so what is it? You know, do you speed up, slow down? Is there a time shortage? You know, you're always running out of time. There's this big concept of time, and there's the practical, economical concept of time. And then on the scale, that could be more along the lines of systems thinking, you know, where you could have more of a multidisciplinary collaboration, like exactly what we had, the three of us. I don't think this would have happened in a pre-COVID world the way it had happened. So I thought this was a great silver lining, and somehow the scale challenge is not solving itself, but it's actually asking us to step up to see, you know, to see it from a more of a macro view. And then the context is what we're all talking about now. It's like, at this point, you cannot be, you can't afford to be not culturally or politically aware or accepting of, you know, things that are happening. There was a time when you didn't want to talk politics, but it can't be, because you just have to bring it up. So that's the context, right? So everything is sort of being funneled through these, I shouldn't say everything, but that's a way to look at it.
So while you guys are sitting thinking about this, just go ahead and spend just a minute or two, a few seconds jotting down things that maybe come to mind when you're thinking about the projects that you're currently working on now, just to give you a little bit of something to share when you first arrive in your breakout rooms in a moment.
Okay, so there is a question. Sorry, what are the questions? We are asking you to think about a research project that you have currently, and can you think about how time, scale, and context affects these projects, and how you could potentially revisit them. We're actually going to put, actually, Jeannie, do you want to introduce the breakout rooms and the?
I think Alberto is introducing them.
Okay, great, that's right.
Are we ready to go to them?
Let me just tell you, we're gonna put a Google Sheet link into the chat right now, and grab that and note which breakout room you're in and use the sheet that corresponds to your breakout room number. We're gonna give you, your group will have about 7 or 8 minutes to discuss each of the different themes, time, scale, and context. So look for a note from the host popping in to let you know when it's time to change topics. I'm putting in the Google Doc, the Google Sheet now.
Great. And just to reiterate, whatever comes to mind in regards to time, scale, and context in your research.
Yeah, we're not really looking for anything super in particular. We're just trying to kind of unload and brainstorm on how are we going to take on this moment.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anybody, you know, it's so funny because it's like, I think even our leadership is winging it at this point.
Nope, we got it. So go ahead, everybody, or go ahead, whoever wants to from the panel. Go ahead and start.
Hello. We're really excited about this conversation, and we are excited to hear some of the insights or observations that you all had during your conversation. So I'm wondering if anyone wants to just start maybe throwing out some ideas that came up in your breakout rooms.
I'd love to kick it off. I was in a group with Neha, Beth, Tulip, and Patrick, and we initially started our conversation around time, thinking very concretely about what is meant to last in the next 6 months, and alternatively, what is meant to last in the next 10 plus years. So really thinking about those chunks of time that you're designing for. And then as the conversation progressed and we got more comfortable, we started thinking, well, what about timelessness, right? What is meant to just be adapted through the ages, and what can beat obsolescence? And that was a super rich moment in our conversation, and I just want to thank those four for that.
I'm trying to take a note because that
that was great.
That was
yeah.
Really,
yeah.
You know, I'm constantly complaining about things that break right after I buy them, and they can't. Who else has something to share?
I guess we actually ended up talking a lot more about teaching, but following your same framework, which worked quite well. And it's like, if you think about the context of social movements and pandemics and what the students are going to in that classroom, but also how do you make that change and the scalability of it. So you might have small changes like to your syllabi, but then maybe you're rethinking your projects and your curriculum, and then longer term, larger systemic changes. But also, I guess that's stealing from Ann Berry and Lisa's panel, but thinking about empowering and engaging your students, but also how they're going through all this stuff, like on Zoom, that context, their attention spans and how much they can keep up.
Yeah.
In our room,
You take it from like a tactical level, and then it becomes a little bit more conceptual, or even reverse. Megan, right?
So,
Sorry.
I'm curious what some of the other folks are thinking about.
There's Elio, right?
yeah, yes. In our room, we talk about, I mentioned that I find myself working many more hours that I used to do it before. I'm not commuting, but I am still, here because we are not going out. And that has been a little bit of a disruption, because we think that when we work at home, we're going to use less, we're going to use our time to do so many other things. But one of the participants, and I don't remember her name, she was saying that she has established a schedule that she works from 9 till 5, and whatever she gets after 5 it has to wait until the following day, and that's working for her.
Structure, routine. I guess routine and structure are way more important now than ever.
Yeah.
Which is hard for creative people, because I don't think most creative people like routine. And I'm learning I have to really do that, because I'm up to 5 a.m. now. I'm now a night person, and my whole time zone has shifted because I'm always on. So I went through burnout this summer because I'm so taxed with rewriting our whole curriculum and everything. But one thing on my research that I came up with is, I think a word I would add to this is momentum.
Momentum, yes.
And to keep the momentum going, you can't let this stop you. So I had to extract what was logical and viable in the research with that limit of, time, no meeting, no context. And it really was a more nimble way to do the research. So that momentum keeps the hope going. Does that make sense?
Sure, because there's this whole idea. I mean, when you have inertia, whether it's from shock or grief, and
right,
you have to take that into consideration during this. We're in the same bubble, right? In some ways, and some people are feeling it a little, more differently. But the momentum is the hardest thing to not only like emerge on your own, like you have to do it for yourself. Whereas I think the environment supported you before, whether it was your commute.
That we talked about in our group about that is that we started thinking about time in really small, little, tiny chunks. Newper had this great idea about like how can we bring it down to just little, tiny moments,
right,
that can build on each other instead of trying to think so big all the time.
Well, and related to that too
ahead,
is the idea of not having to think so hard all the time. And we, in our group, we talked about the value of ritual and of the commute, the morning commute. When you're driving, your brain is working on all sorts of other things, prepping for class, thinking about your research, emotional things with your students. And in the absence of those low-level thinking activities, it's kind of hard to not force yourself to be such a hard thinker all the time, thinking about your research, thinking about your curriculum, thinking about how to help your students. And because we have fewer opportunities to kind of have those quiet moments in the car, it's no surprise that our brains hurt by the end of the day, because our thinking is so structured rather than going on in the background, while we're daydreaming or driving or walking across campus.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. I constantly have that exact phrase in my head, my brain hurts.
It's, like it needs like something novel. And so when you are in your commute, you are sort of kind of delegating your more important tasks to the other side of your brain while you're focused on driving. And then somehow solutions just pop up. And now it's like, I think everyone's just on all the time.
One of the things I noticed too is this reconnected me with my body. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
sure.
Like I get so in my head, that's why you're on 24/7. And I remembered some research I had looked at in graduate school that talked about how walking, just taking a walk around the block, was really an important thing to creativity, just like sleep is to long-term learning process. And we're so disconnected from our bodies in this world. So I thought, my God, I've just got to walk. I've got to get outside in the sun. And these rituals like you're talking about are reconnecting us with our physicality, which I think we tend to ignore in modern life, especially in the digital age. So there's research to back that up.
Right now, our physicality is kind of really being pressed into our faces in a lot of ways too, with like morbidity is like right there.
Oh yeah. They have freezer trucks here in the parking lot for the dead bodies. It's so bad.
Are you in Texas?
I'm right on the border of Mexico, and that's the hot spot right now. So
we have that in Arizona right now too. And
really,
it's really weird.
Well, it really brings, the holistic view of what we are as people. We can't just be in our head online all the time. So that'll help, I think, in how I coach my students.
Curious to see, all this, there is this, going off on a tangent, but not really, before COVID, the Columbia Research Lab, Columbia University has this death lab, and have you heard of that?
Yes.
Yeah, and
Go
so
ahead.
I mean, they've been doing installations for a handful of years. One was under the Manhattan Bridge where there were projections. I'm not sure what the technology was, but basically all the souls that had passed, it was beautiful. It was just really beautifully done. So this idea, you know, in the Western world that we just sort of put death under the rug. You're talking about refrigerators like being in your backyard. And, you know, we are now having to deal with this mortality in a more dignified way rather than just like, let's just ship them over here or put them into a nursing home. I'm curious and I'm optimistic to see how we start talking. And there's even a design for death. They're looking, I mean, some of the architecture here is taking that into consideration.
I just want to change the subject a little bit, right? Because we're going to get kicked out in a second. And I want to turn us back to something more positive. I would love to see you guys put into the Slack channel links to the things that have been inspiring you. You know, we showed you some of the things that have been inspiring us. And I'm really curious to know what has inspired you during this time and kept you kind of feeling hopeful. And I look forward to seeing some of that stuff.
Where did our moderators, I don't see them on the top. Are they still there?
Yeah, they're here.
Oh, okay.
So I really,
5 more minutes, so you can keep going for 5 more minutes.
Oh, okay.
oh yeah. So
Anybody else want to say anything?
Okay.
One of the topics that we discussed, and I think that, I mean, the one of, which was the third one, context, right? That right now somebody said, I don't remember who said that before we wouldn't talk about politics and now we have to, right? And it was interesting, the different answers that were there. But I still, personally, I said that I would talk politics about all the time because that's my background. That's where I come from. And I know, and I'm making this really assumption is that Americans tend not to talk about those kind of topics. I just gave my experience. I came the first time to the US as a Fulbright scholar, and I was told by Fulbright, don't talk about sex, politics, or religion with Americans. Don't bring that ever. That was part of the training. It was in the early 90s, so still it was different. But it's still, you know, with my colleagues, and when we talk about these issues, it's really like a hot potato. It's not, and then it's very polarized. One of the participants who was from Korea was saying that in the US, we have two very distinctive political parties. So you're either this or that, and then there's nothing in between, right? So I am not sure what your experience, I am really eager to hear from Americans born here, right? Or with a real mindset from this culture, if that has changed. In my case, it hasn't because I have a big mouth, but in other cases, I don't know.
I think it has changed. You can't be on a Facebook page today, even with professional contacts, and not talk about it. So in a way, I think it is, you have no choice because you're so traumatized that you can no longer, ignore what's happening. You could put it under recent events or under politics, but it has changed. Maybe not to the level of other countries that get very passionate and it's a dinner table conversation. But at least regionally here, I see it changing. But maybe that's just, New York City and its opinionatedness, but I think there's hope for that. And I don't think you can get away with ignoring it because that's driving everything at the moment.
For what thoughts do you have? I'm just curious.
Did you call on me?
Yeah, I'm just curious what you're thinking.
I'm taking it all in. I do think it is, I agree with what Elia was saying, is that we can't ignore what's happening politically. And we have to, I've been thinking about how I have to be more comfortable to bring politics and my perspective into the classroom and into my work and own that, and also own that I'll make mistakes and I'll be learning, and being vulnerable, I think is one thing I'm learning. And I just think, like, no matter what, in these times, we're all vulnerable. And so I think that's an underlying thing I'm thinking about is vulnerability and just giving into the vulnerability.
That's really beautiful.